Have you ever walked away from a conversation and thought, wait, why do I feel like I lost, even though I said everything I needed to? That strange lump in your throat, that sense of frustration, like every word you said actually took something from you instead of giving you strength. Maybe you've been surrounded by people who dominate conversations. They interrupt, speak over you, laugh at your ideas, not because they're smarter, but because they've learned how to use volume and arrogance like weapons. And maybe you've bought into this idea that staying quiet is weak, that if you don't defend yourself, if you don't argue back, then you're somehow surrendering, that if you're silent, you've already lost. But what if that's not true? What if all of that, everything you've been taught about speaking up, about arguing, about proving yourself, is just one big illusion? Here's a wild idea. Maybe real power doesn't come from saying more. Maybe it comes from saying nothing. There was a philosopher, one of the most misunderstood minds in history, who saw something most people are too afraid to even consider. His name was Nietzsche, and his take? The loudest voice is usually the weakest one. The person who tries hardest to convince you is usually the one least convinced themselves. The world trains us to fight for our point, to explain, to defend, to speak louder just to be heard. But nature, and I mean nature in the deepest, most primal sense, offers a completely different strategy, a smarter, more strategic, even deadlier one. Silence. Yeah, silence. Nietzsche didn't see silence as the absence of words. He saw it as a presence. Something that shifts the room, something that disarms, something that makes people uncomfortable. Because when there's no noise, they're forced to face themselves. This video is for anyone who feels like they've been walked over in conversations, for the ones who try to be the peacemaker, the calm voice in a loud room, only to feel overlooked, unacknowledged, or dismissed. If you've ever left a discussion thinking, they didn't really hear me, this is for you. Maybe you've confused your silence with weakness, but I'm here to show you it's the opposite. Silence isn't surrender. It can be your greatest weapon and real victory. It doesn't come from winning an argument. It comes from realizing you never needed to argue in the first place. So let's break this down. Why do we feel so desperate to respond when someone challenges us? Why do we feel this almost physical need to correct people, to make sure they know we're right? Because we've been trained to believe that truth needs defending, that if we don't speak up, someone else's version of reality wins, that if we don't explain ourselves, we've somehow failed. But Nietzsche saw something deeper beneath all that. He believed our need to argue, to explain, to prove ourselves wasn't strength. It was fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear that if we don't say something, people might not see us at all. But guess what drives that fear? Our ego, the part of us that can't stand being questioned. That sees disagreement as attack. That takes everything personally and turns every conversation into a battle. Nietzsche wasn't impressed by that. He saw it for what it was. Insecurity dressed up as confidence. He believed that most arguments aren't really about truth at all. They're about power, about control, about people trying to validate their own beliefs not because they're strong, but because deep down they're fragile. If those beliefs are challenged, their whole sense of self starts to fall apart, and that's the trap. Because the second you feel the need to justify yourself, to defend your point, you've already lost. You've stepped into their game. You've made their opinion of you more important than your own presence. Nietzsche called this the morality of the herd. It's the behavior of people who are constantly chasing approval, trying to be seen as good, reasonable, respectable. But that chase, it keeps you small. It keeps you dependent. Real strength, Nietzsche said, comes when you no longer need anyone's approval, when you can be misunderstood and stay grounded, when you can face criticism, laughter, rejection, and not flinch. That's power, and it's not loud, it's not flashy. It's not filled with comebacks and clever retorts. It's quiet, controlled, deep. It's the power of someone who doesn't react. Because if you really want to win in any interaction, here's what you need to understand. The moment you react emotionally, you give your power away. You're no longer leading, you're following. You've let them set the tone. Nietzsche saw reactive people as enslaved by their own emotions. He said the truly dangerous person isn't the one who talks the most. It's the one who watches, listens, observes, and chooses when or if they respond. That's the person who holds the real power. So, what do you do if you want to shift that power dynamic without ever saying a word? Well, Nietzsche gave us an answer, a very specific image. He called it the Übermensch, or Overman. This wasn't just some fantasy ideal. It was a goal, a type of human who rises above all the games society plays. Someone who doesn't react like everyone else. Who doesn't need the approval of the crowd? Who doesn't live by the rules others impose? And do you know what makes the Übermensch so powerful? He doesn't just choose silence. He masters it. He speaks only when it matters. And when he does, it's like dropping a hammer. Not because he's trying to be loud, but because what he says carries weight, presence, authority. And when he says nothing, that silence alone speaks louder than anything else in the room. He doesn't engage in pointless debates. He doesn't waste energy trying to convince people. He doesn't react to provocations. Why? Because he doesn't need to. His silence isn't emptiness, it's pressure. A presence that makes people second-guess everything they're saying. Think about it. How many times has someone kept silent during an argument and it threw you off completely? That pause, that lack of reaction, it unsettles you. It makes you start questioning yourself. That's not weakness. That's precision. In the next part, we're going to dive deeper into this figure of the Übermensch and break down exactly how he uses silence not just to stay in control, but to completely dominate the room without ever raising his voice. This is where silence stops being passive and starts becoming a tool of absolute psychological power. So let's talk about the Übermensch, the figure Nietzsche imagined as the next evolution of humanity. Not some superhero in a cape, but a person who's risen above the noise, above the need to explain, prove, or justify themselves. The Übermensch doesn't argue, he doesn't flinch, he doesn't beg to be understood. Instead, he moves through the world like a force, confident, composed, and, more often than not, silent. That silence, it's not emptiness, it's presence. You feel it when he walks in a room. He doesn't need to shout to be heard. He doesn't need to defend his position. His very stillness demands respect. Because silence, when wielded intentionally, becomes more than just a pause. It becomes pressure, a mirror, a weapon. The Übermensch understands something most people completely miss. Every time you speak, you reveal something. Every time you react, you hand over a little piece of yourself, a bit of your power, your fear, your insecurity. But when you remain silent, you stay unreadable. You become the unknown in the room. And the unknown, that's where all the power lies. Because silence does something to people. It makes them nervous. It makes them fill in the blanks. They start projecting their own fears onto you. Why isn't he responding? Is he judging me? Did I say something wrong? Their own thoughts turn against them. That's why the Übermensch chooses silence. Not because he's got nothing to say, but because he doesn't need to say anything. He knows that in a world addicted to noise, silence is rare. And rare things, they stand out. They carry weight. They unsettle. This silence isn't passive, it's deliberate. It's power under control. While others argue, he observes. While others try to dominate through volume, he dominates through presence. One look, one pause. That's all it takes. And when he finally does speak, it lands like a thunderclap, because he's been quiet for so long that people are ready to listen. Now think about your own life. How many conversations have you been in where you felt you had to prove something just to feel seen? How often have you spoken just to defend yourself from being misunderstood? That's the trap. Because the second you need to explain, you've already lost control of the frame. You've handed the power over. But if you can sit in that discomfort, if you can stay calm while someone talks circles around themselves, you flip the script, you turn the room. Because silence, it destabilizes. Studies in psychology back this up. Silence in social settings, especially during confrontational moments, is almost always perceived as judgment. You don't even have to say a word. Just listening quietly can make someone feel exposed. It kicks their brain into panic mode. Their amygdala, the fear center, goes on high alert. They start to wonder what you're thinking. They get paranoid, defensive. Even if your face is neutral, the lack of response forces them to face themselves. And most people, they're not equipped for that. Because most people don't talk to express truth. They talk to protect themselves, to be liked, to sound smart, to avoid looking weak. But when you respond with silence, you take that shield away. Suddenly, their words aren't bouncing off you anymore. They're echoing back at them. And here's where it gets really interesting. Silence doesn't just make them uncomfortable. It can challenge you too. Because let's be honest, it's hard to stay quiet when someone challenges you. When you feel misunderstood, when your name or your intentions are being dragged through the mud, everything in you wants to react, to clear the air, to prove them wrong. But Nietzsche would say, don't. Because that reaction, that's your ego talking. That's your conditioning. That's your weakness begging to be validated. True silence, the kind that holds real power, can only come from one place: self-mastery. It's choosing not to react even when every part of you is screaming to speak. It's being okay with being misunderstood. It's knowing you owe no explanations to people who haven't earned the right to hear them. And this is exactly what makes silence so dangerous to manipulators. See, manipulators thrive on your emotional responses. They bait you with comments. They poke at your insecurities. They say things just to trigger a reaction, because your reaction gives them leverage. But if you don't give them one, if you sit back, stay composed, observe, they lose control. They start to spiral. They over-explain. They reveal too much, because your silence forces them to perform without a partner. They can't play their game if you're not playing back, and eventually they expose themselves, their need for control, their lies, their weaknesses. That's why silence is so effective. It disrupts the entire emotional ecosystem, but it goes even deeper than that. Silence can also trigger something more primal. It can unearth wounds in others that they didn't even know were there. Rejection, abandonment, insecurity. Because when someone's used to being the center of attention, your silence tells them they're not. When they're used to manipulating conversations, your silence tells them they've lost control. When they rely on validation, your silence tells them they're not getting it. And for the narcissistic ego, that's unbearable. But here's the catch: silence is hard, not just for them, but for you, because it goes against everything we've been taught. It feels unnatural not to explain yourself, not to smooth things over, not to fix the discomfort, but that's the point. Silence is a discipline. It's resistance. It's power forged in self-control. And now that you understand how silence works in the minds of others, how it disorients, exposes, and destabilizes, let's go one step further. Let's stop just understanding silence and start using it. Let's turn it into a weapon. In the next part, I'll show you exactly how to do that, how to make silence work for you strategically and intentionally. We'll talk about 4 specific tools you can use to master silence in real-life conversations, tools that give you the upper hand without saying a single word. Because when you learn how to wield silence, You stop being the background character and you become the gravitational center of the room. And that's when everything changes, So now we know that silence can be powerful, more than powerful. It can be transformational. But the real question is, how do you actually use it? How do you take all of this theory, the psychology, the philosophy, and apply it in real life? How do you turn silence from just not talking into something that shakes people, redirects energy, shifts outcomes? Let's walk through it. The first step is also the hardest. Be silent when your instincts are screaming to speak. That moment when someone challenges you, accuses you, misunderstands you, that's when silence becomes hardest. Your mind floods with counterpoints. Your body fills with heat. Your ego wants to jump up and say, "That's not true," or "You don't get it." But here's the truth. Reacting in that moment is a trap. Every time you jump in to explain or defend, you're showing that you're still caught up in their game, that you still need their approval, that their misunderstanding has power over you. So instead of reacting, pause. Let the moment stretch. Feel that fire inside you, and don't touch it. Just sit in it. Let the silence rise like a tide. Because in that space, something amazing happens. You don't lose control, you gain it. The person who can stay silent when every part of them wants to speak, that person is dangerous. That person is untouchable. And over time, that silence becomes presence, command, wait. The second technique, use silence to observe, not to retreat. A lot of people misunderstand silence as withdrawal, as if you're backing down. But true silence is the opposite. It's engagement, just at a deeper level. When others talk, you listen, but not like most people listen. You're not waiting for your turn to speak. You're not just hearing words, you're tracking energy, inconsistencies, insecurities, that subtle hesitation when someone's bluffing, that nervous laugh, that over-explanation that gives away fear. You listen like a strategist, like a hunter in the woods, hearing the rustle of prey long before it appears. And the best part, you say nothing. You store it all, so that if you decide to speak, it's surgical, sharp, impactful. Because silence gives you time to read the room, assess the battlefield, and plan your strike, if a strike is even needed. The third weapon in your silent arsenal. Time. Let silence last. Let the pause hang. Most people can't handle it. The tension gets unbearable. The silence becomes a pressure cooker. When someone makes a point and expects your rebuttal, but you just look at them and say nothing, it drives them inward. They start to wonder if they've made a mistake, if they went too far, if you're judging them. Their thoughts spiral. Why isn't he responding? Is she angry? Did I cross a line? You didn't have to say a single word, but now they're unraveling themselves. Silence did the work for you. So next time you're in a conversation, don't rush to fill the gap. Let the gap expand. Watch what happens. Fourth technique, unpredictability. Silence makes you unreadable, and people fear what they can't predict. When you master silence, you stop being reactive, and that confuses people. They can't label you. They don't know your next move. They can't manipulate you because they don't know what you'll respond to. And when people don't know what to expect from you, they tread more carefully. They measure their words. They adjust their energy. Because now, you are the one. They're trying to understand. You become the gravitational center of every interaction. The conversation starts revolving around you, not because you're talking a lot, but because your silence pulls everything toward it. But here's the warning, and it's important. Don't confuse silence with weakness. What we're talking about here is not avoidance. It's not passivity. It's not keeping the peace because you're afraid of conflict. That kind of silence, Nietzsche would reject it completely. That's submission. That's fear wearing a mask. The silence we're mastering is active. It's charged. It's a calculated choice. You're not staying quiet because you have nothing to say. You're staying quiet because you don't need to say anything, because your presence is already speaking louder than words ever could. You're not avoiding the battle. You're ending it before it even begins. Because here's the deeper truth. Most conflicts don't need to be fought. They collapse the moment you stop giving them energy. And silence is the most powerful withdrawal of energy there is. But there's another side to all this, a darker side. Because while silence can be a weapon, it can also be a trap. And this is where things get complicated. Some people live in silence, but not because they're powerful, not because they've chosen it. They live in silence because they've been conditioned to believe that's all they're allowed. They stay quiet because they're scared. Scared of being wrong, scared of being too much, scared of not being accepted. They've been taught that speaking up is dangerous, that being visible is risky. And so, their silence isn't strength, it's a silent scream. They're shrinking, fading, letting the world talk over them. And every day, they lose more and more of their own voice. This isn't the silence of presence, it's the silence of erasure. And if you've ever felt that, like your silence wasn't a choice but a default setting, you're not alone. But you need to hear this. You've been told a lie. You've been told that staying quiet is noble, that not speaking is mature, that letting others win is some kind of virtue. But Nietzsche would call that what it really is, slavery. He wrote about something called slave morality, a set of beliefs created by the weak to survive in a world ruled by the strong. It's a morality of guilt, of restraint, of self-denial, and it teaches people to shrink, to be nice, to never push back, even when they should. Sound familiar? If you've ever found yourself being the reasonable one while others push, take, dominate, that's not you being wise. That's you being used. And I don't say that to hurt you. I say that because once you see it, you can change it. You can stop participating in your own silence. You can stop applauding yourself for disappearing. You can stop calling submission balance. Because that's not balance, that's self-betrayal. So here's what Nietzsche would tell you. It's time to kill that version of silence. The version that hides, that bows, that flinches, and replace it with the silence that stands tall, the silence that commands. That doesn't ask for space, but creates it. That doesn't chase validation, but holds still and waits for the world to catch up. Because when you do that, everything changes. You're no longer the person who stays quiet to avoid the storm. You are the storm, calm, centered, unmoving, and powerful beyond words. In the next part, we're going to talk about what it really means to embody this level of presence. What it takes to not just understand the Übermensch, but to become one. We've laid the foundation. Now it's time to step into it. Now that we've explored what silence can do and how it can be used as a weapon, a shield, and even a spotlight, it's time to go all in. It's time to move from theory to embodiment, from understanding the Übermensch to becoming one. Let's make this real. First, understand this. The Übermensch, the ideal Nietzsche proposed, isn't about being above other people. It's not about superiority for its own sake. It's about living above the influence of other people's expectations. It's about becoming so grounded in your own values, your own sense of self, that nothing, not criticism, not misunderstanding, not rejection, can shake you. And that kind of person, they don't need to explain themselves. Their silence says everything. So how do you get there? Step 1. Own your truth without broadcasting it. In a world where everyone is oversharing, explaining, defending, and justifying every thought they have, you'll stand out just by being centered, quiet, focused. You don't need to post a thread to prove you've grown. You don't need to clap back to show you're strong. The Übermensch understands that truth doesn't need an audience. It just is. And when people don't understand you, you let them. That's their business, not yours. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be. Step 2. Kill the need to be liked. This one stings, because let's be honest, most of us, even the strongest among us, want to be liked. It's natural, but it's also limiting. If your sense of self rises and falls based on how others perceive you, you are always vulnerable. The Übermensch, he's done with that. He doesn't chase applause. He doesn't need agreement. His silence is often misinterpreted, but he lets it be, because he knows that being misunderstood is the price of being untouchable. You don't need everyone to get you. You just need to stop giving them the steering wheel. Step 3. Learn to sit in discomfort. Here's the truth no one tells you. Silence is uncomfortable. For you, not just others, especially if you're used to fixing things, smoothing things over, or explaining yourself into peace. But the Übermensch doesn't flinch at discomfort. He welcomes it, because he knows discomfort is the birthplace of power. That moment when your silence stretches long enough to make the other person fidget, backpedal, or spiral, that's where you hold the line. That's where transformation happens, not by dominating them, but by refusing to abandon yourself. Step 4. Let your presence speak. This isn't about being stone-faced or emotionless. It's about carrying a certain energy, a groundedness that others can feel. You walk into a room and people notice you, not because you're loud, but because you're there, fully. You don't need to say a word. Your posture, your eye contact, your stillness, they say more than a monologue ever could. This is the silence of the Übermensch, not the silence of fear, the silence of mastery, and the people who thrive on chaos, on noise, on manipulation. They feel it. They sense your boundary, not because you announced it, but because your energy tells them, I'm not here to play games, and they either adjust or fall away. But let's talk about the hardest part of all of this, because it's not just about dealing with others, it's about dealing with yourself. Because silence, real, intentional silence, doesn't just expose the weaknesses in others, it exposes your own. When you stop reacting, when you stop explaining, when you let the noise fall away, you're left with you. And maybe, for the first time, you'll hear that inner voice that's been drowned out for years. The one that says, you've been hiding, you've been shrinking, you've been giving your power away. That's not easy to hear, but it's necessary, because before you can hold power in the world, you have to reclaim it inside. Nietzsche believed that most people avoid silence because they're afraid of what they'll find there, not in others, but in themselves. That's why so many people stay loud, stay distracted, stay reactive, because silence is a mirror, and in that mirror, all the masks fall off. So when you choose to become the Übermensch, when you decide to master silence, you're also choosing to face yourself, to confront the parts of you that have been operating on autopilot, the fears, the people-pleasing, the anger you've swallowed for years. And here's the twist. That confrontation, that's the real power. Because once you've faced your own noise and survived it, there's nothing left to fear in the world. No insult can touch you. No misunderstanding can destabilize you. You've already looked your ego in the eye and chosen mastery instead. And that brings us to the most crucial skill of all. Knowing when to break the silence. Because silence isn't just about withholding, it's about timing. It's about recognizing the exact moment when one sentence, one phrase, can end a conversation, shift an energy, flip a dynamic. And when you do speak, it's not because you're triggered. It's because you've calculated the moment. You've let the silence do 90% of the work, And now you're delivering the final move. One sentence, not shouted, not defensive, just sharp, clear, undeniable. That's the difference between power and performance. And that's what the world doesn't teach you. It teaches you to yell louder, post more, be seen, be heard, react, react, react. But the Übermensch knows. Real power doesn't make noise. Real power doesn't need to be seen. Real power waits. And when it finally moves, it changes everything. So where does this leave you? Maybe you're someone who's always been quiet, but never knew that your quiet could be strength. Maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, talked over, and maybe part of you started believing that you were just too soft, too passive, or not confident enough. But now you know the truth. Silence is not weakness. It is not surrender. Silence, when used with presence, strategy, and inner clarity, is a force, a language, a weapon, a choice. And when you use it intentionally, no one can control you anymore. In the final part of this journey, we're going to bring it all together, because there's still one final transformation waiting for you. The moment where you step into silence not just as a practice, but as an identity. We're going to uncover the deepest layer of Nietzsche's message, that silence is not just about how you deal with others, it's about how you rewrite your own existence. The world doesn't need more talkers, it needs more masters of silence. Are you ready to become one? Are you ready to become? Here we are, the final part of the journey. If you've made it this far, it means something inside you already knows. The way you've been taught to use your voice, your energy, your presence, it's no longer enough. Something deeper is calling. And now it's time to step into that calling fully. Because silence, as you've seen, is not just a tactic. It's not just a trick for handling arguments or a way to disarm manipulative people. Silence, in its highest form, is a way of being. It's presence. It's power that doesn't need to be proved. And when you reach this level, when silence stops being something you use and becomes something you are, everything around you changes. People treat you differently. Conversations take a different tone. The chaos of the world no longer pulls you in the same way, because your center is no longer out there, it's within you. Nietzsche called this the will to power, but not the power you might be thinking of. Not dominance over others, not control, not manipulation. The true will to power is mastery over yourself. It's the moment you stop letting your emotions run wild, the moment you stop outsourcing your identity to how others perceive you, the moment you no longer speak out of fear, guilt, or the need to be validated. You just exist, fully, unapologetically, and on your own terms. And your silence, it becomes the signature of that existence. Think about how different that is from how most people live. Most people stay silent for the wrong reasons. They think they're being noble, mature, wise, but underneath, they're afraid to disrupt, afraid to lose approval, afraid to stand out. They've been conditioned to equate silence with peace. But really, it's just self-erasure. And Nietzsche saw that for what it was. He didn't romanticize quiet suffering. He didn't praise those who stayed invisible to avoid discomfort. He wrote for the ones who were ready to tear down the masks, to break the conditioning, to become something more. And now that knowledge is in your hands. So the question is no longer, how do I stay silent in arguments? It's, how do I become the kind of person whose silence commands respect? It starts with this shift. Stop seeing silence as something you fall into. Start seeing it as something you stand in. This silence isn't shrinking, it's expansion. It's claiming your space so fully that no noise can distort it. It's the silence that walks into a room and doesn't try to impress, because it doesn't need to. It's the silence that listens not to agree or to argue, but to understand everything, and speak only when speaking is the most powerful move left. But this kind of silence, it requires courage. the courage to face the discomfort, to be misunderstood, to be labeled cold or arrogant or distant, because some people will project all that onto you when you stop playing their games. You have to let them. You have to be okay with being misread, because their reaction isn't your responsibility. Your presence is. And here's something no one talks about. This transformation won't always be comfortable. You'll lose some people. Not everyone will follow you into this new space, and that's okay. Some people are only attached to the version of you who made them comfortable. But when you rise, when you embrace your silence, your authority, your calm, they might not know what to do with you anymore. Let them go. You're not becoming the Ubermensch to win popularity contests. You're becoming the Ubermensch to reclaim your life. And here's what that looks like in practice. You stop rushing to fill silence in conversations. You stop defending every choice you make. You stop needing to explain your boundaries. You stop reacting just because someone provokes you. And instead, you let your stillness speak. You let people feel your no without having to say it 3 times. You observe. You wait. You respond only when it's time. And even then, you choose your words like a scalpel, not a sword. This is when you truly understand what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are. It's not about finding yourself. It's about forging yourself, about choosing which parts of you survive. And silence, real, grounded, powerful silence, is the fire that forges the strongest steel. Now look at your life. Really look. How many times have you stayed silent because you thought it was mature, only to realize later you were just afraid? How often have you kept the peace only to find that it cost you your own? How many moments have you allowed yourself to be stepped over, interrupted, misunderstood, because deep down you weren't ready to take up space? That ends today. Nietzsche would say, to live like that is an offense to existence itself. The universe didn't put you here to be agreeable. It didn't give you this mind, this voice, this energy, just to have it silenced by other people's expectations. You're here to become so rooted in who you are that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. That's what silence becomes when you master it. It's not avoidance. It's not insecurity. It's not fear. It's the calm confidence of someone who doesn't just survive noise. They outlast it because words come and go. Arguments fade, but presence, that stays. And if you've made it all the way through this journey, if something in you is ready to let go of the old version, the reactive version, the explaining version, then say it out loud, in writing, to yourself, to this community. Say, I choose the silence that commands respect. Not because it's trendy, not because it sounds deep, but because you've earned it. You've listened, you've reflected, you've realized that the world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who can hold stillness like a sword. So say it again. I choose the silence that commands respect. Let that be your new standard, and don't stop here. The next chapter of your growth isn't just about knowing this, it's about living it. Every room you enter, every conversation you have, every moment someone tries to provoke you, pull you off center, or demand an explanation from you, hold your silence, let it do the work. Because when you master silence, you master yourself. And once you do that, no one can control you again.